Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into something fundamental, maybe even a bit unsettling. It's this constant tension, right, between our own actions, our agency, and just, well, pure luck. How much of what happens to us, the good and the bad, is down to our skill, our choices, and how much is just the universe rolling the dice?
It's a huge question, and yeah, definitely uncomfortable sometimes. We're sort of wired to believe in merit, aren't we? That success is earned, failure is deserved. But when you actually look closely across different fields, think entrepreneurship, science, even just daily life, the source material we've gathered really pushes back on that simple view. We're pulling from psychology, philosophy, even some hard-nosed entrepreneurial strategy today to really unpack this.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission here isn't just to say, oh, it's a mix of hard work and luck. That's too easy. We want to get into the mechanics of randomness, how we actually perceive it, and maybe, crucially, how acknowledging luck, really facing it, can paradoxically make us more effective, maybe even better agents in the world.
That's the core tension, isn't it? We crave control. We want to feel like we're driving. But the reality we operate in, it's fundamentally random, stochastic. The goal isn't to somehow beat luck or eliminate it. That's impossible. It's more about learning how to dance with it, maybe. How to engineer opportunities for good luck, and how to keep perspective when things inevitably go sideways.
Okay, so let's start with something practical, a concept that gives you, the listener, a feeling of, well, some control over this randomness. I really like this one. It's called the luck surface area, or LSA. It basically tries to quantify serendipity.
Exactly. LSA reframes luck. It's not some mystical force. It's more like an input-output system. The idea is it's the amount of serendipity potential in your life, and the model suggests you can directly influence this surface area through deliberate action. It's probably the closest we get to a real formula for making your own luck.
And the formula itself, it's actually pretty neat. Luck, doing, X telling.
Yeah.
Sounds simple, maybe too simple, but the devil's in the details, right? And how we define doing and telling.
Right.
Let's break down doing first.
Right. So doing isn't just activity for activity's sake. It's not just being busy. What the sources really stress is authenticity, genuine interest. It has to come from a place of real engagement, something deeper than just, chasing the latest trend or trying to replicate someone else's success.
Okay, but why authenticity? Why does that matter so much? Couldn't I just grind away, put in the hours, even if I'm like totally cynical about it?
You could try, sure. But the argument is that authentic interest is the engine for persistence. When you're genuinely fascinated by something, you're willing to push through the failures, the boring bits, the plateaus that would make a copycat or someone just looking for a quick win. Well, they'd just give up. And that persistence, it naturally exposes you to more random events, more potential opportunities over a much longer time. Plus, people can often sense that genuine commitment. It signals quality, staying power, makes others more willing to bet on you, essentially.
Ah, okay. So passion isn't just fluffy emotion here. It's a practical commitment device that increases your exposure rate to chance events. Makes sense. Now, the second part, telling. This seems to be where a lot of brilliant doing kind of fizzles out.
No, absolutely. You can do groundbreaking work, but if it stays locked in your basement, metaphorically speaking, it generates zero luck. Telling here means effectively communicating what you're doing. And effectively is the key word. It's about reaching the right people in a way they understand. It's the difference between just making noise and delivering a clear signal that someone else can actually receive, process, and maybe even amplify for you.
So not just tweeting about it randomly, it's crafting the message so it's easy to grasp, easy to remember, compelling enough that someone else wants to pass it on. Like, hey, you should check this out.
Precisely. If someone hears about your project and 5 minutes later they can't explain the basic idea to a colleague, your telling failed, miserably. The goal is to maximize the velocity and clarity of your message spreading through networks. You can have amazing doing, but if your telling score is near zero, your luck surface area stays tiny. Which brings us right to that classic problem, especially common in technical fields, the engineer's pitfall.
Yeah. My work is so brilliant, it should just speak for itself. Mindset. I've definitely encountered that.
It's almost tragic sometimes. You see incredibly talented engineers, scientists, analysts, people who deeply value merit. They often crave recognition for their skill, but they recoil from the idea of actively seeking attention. They feel like the quality alone should automatically lead to reward. But the world, the market, your organization, it can't reward what it doesn't know exists or doesn't understand. Relying on the work to speak for itself makes you incredibly vulnerable, often dependent on a single manager noticing you. That's fragile.
Okay, so we have a great case study for this, right? Someone who consciously used LSA to break out of that kind of situation, Simon Holmes.
Yes, his story is a perfect illustration. He was working with older tech, felt a bit stuck, and wanted to deliberately create more opportunities for himself. A very intentional move. So his strategy was pure LSA. He picked a new, growing field, the Node.js ecosystem, basically modern web development tech, and instead of just learning it quietly, he started blogging his entire learning process publicly. But it wasn't just a diary. He forced himself to explain complex concepts clearly.
That's the doing and telling right there, perfectly combined. Learning the new tech was the doing, blogging was the telling. And forcing himself to explain it probably deepened the doing too, right?
Absolutely. Teaching is often the best way to learn. Knowing you have to explain something coherently to strangers forces you to understand it at a much deeper level. You can't fudge it. It created this positive feedback loop. Better understanding led to better blog posts, which maybe attracted more readers, which motivated him to learn more. The doing and telling reinforced each other.
And the outcome was pretty remarkable, wasn't it?
It really was. After about a year or so of consistently doing this, he got an email out of the blue from Pact Publishing. They wanted him to write a book based on his blog, unsolicited.
Wow.
But wait, it gets better. A few months later, another major tech publisher, Manning, also reached out, again, totally unsolicited, asking him to write for them.
2 unsolicited book deals from major publishers. That's hitting the serendipity jackpot.
It looks like pure luck from the outside, right? But it was manufactured luck. He intentionally increased his LSA by doing valuable work and making sure people knew about it, telling. That book, Getting Mean, became a bestseller. And the key insight for listeners isn't just about side projects or blogging. You can apply this inside your job within a large company.
How does that work? How do you increase your internal LSA to get noticed by, say, your boss's boss or people in other departments?
You have to consciously fight the work speaks for itself tendency. Volunteer for projects that cross team boundaries that exposes your skills to new people. Build small tools. Write clear documentation that actually helps colleagues, that generates goodwill and visibility. Share what you learn on the company intranet or internal blogs. And, crucially, don't become a knowledge bottleneck. If you create something great, make sure others can use it and understand it. Let your baby fly free, so to speak. That way, when opportunities arise, promotions, special projects your name is already circulating, people beyond your immediate manager know your value. That's internal LSA.
Okay, so we've talked about actively making luck. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at how we perceive luck. This is about the psychology, right? What the sources call luck is a subjective attribute. There's a key distinction here.
Yes, this is fascinating stuff. It's about the difference between how we know luck works rationally and how we often feel about it, maybe irrationally. Rationally, we understand luck is external, random, unstable. It hits, it misses, it's unpredictable. But irrationally, a lot of people tend to see luck almost as a personal quality, like I'm just a lucky person, or conversely, I'm cursed. They treat it as something internal, somewhat stable.
And interestingly, that irrational belief, that feeling of being lucky, can actually influence behavior, can't it? Like, studies show people who feel lucky might be more confident and maybe take more risks.
Exactly. There's research suggesting just that. Believing you're lucky can boost confidence, make you more optimistic, maybe more willing to jump on an ambiguous opportunity. Of course, it can also lead to overconfidence, especially in things like gambling, where believing in hot streaks is a known fallacy. But in general life situations, a little belief in your own good fortune might not hurt.
The work by Richard Wiseman seems central here. He actually studied people who strongly identified as either lucky or unlucky. What did you find?
His work is foundational. He found pretty consistent personality differences. Self-proclaimed lucky people tended to score higher on extroversion and openness to experience.
Okay, why would being outgoing and open make you luckier? Seems counterintuitive.
Well, think about it mechanically. Extroverts simply interact with more people. More interactions mean a higher statistical chance of a serendipitous encounter, meeting someone who offers a job, a useful contact, a key piece of information. And openness. Open people are just more likely to notice and act on unexpected possibilities. A lucky open person might see a flyer for an interesting talk, go along and meet someone important. A closed person might walk right past the flyer or see it and think, nah, not for me. Wiseman argued the opportunities were often the same. The lucky person simply had the mindset to perceive and seize them.
Which brings us to his famous bank robbery thought experiment. Or maybe it was a real scenario he used. Tell us about that. It really highlights the power of reframing.
Yeah, it's a classic illustration. Imagine two people get caught up in a bank robbery. Both end up getting shot, but non-fatally, say, in the arm. The person who identifies as unlucky focuses on the negative event itself. Can you believe my luck? I just pop into the bank for 5 minutes and I get shot. The focus is purely on the misfortune.
Right. But the person who sees themselves as lucky, how do they frame the exact same event?
They reframe it by focusing on what didn't happen. They'd say something like, wow, how lucky am I? I got shot, but it was only in the arm. I could have been killed. Notice, they're not denying the bad event happened. They're not saying getting shot was good. They're comparing the actual outcome to a worse possible outcome and finding the luck in that difference. It's a shift in perspective.
That's a really important point. This isn't about pretending bad things are good, which can feel, well, toxic sometimes, like toxic positivity.
Exactly. It's not about denial or minimizing trauma. The lucky person in Wiseman's example acknowledges the reality getting shot is objectively bad, but their cognitive framing focuses on the fortunate aspect within that bad situation, survival. It's about finding a realistic positive angle which builds resilience, rather than creating a false narrative that ignores the negative entirely. That's the crucial difference.
And we see this framing effect play out in how people perceive really ambiguous events, right? Events with extreme good and bad luck mixed together, like the Japanese man who survived both atomic bombs.
Tsutomu Yamaguchi, yes, an incredible, almost unbelievable story. Or Private Channing Moss, the U.S. soldier who survived having a live RPG embedded in his abdomen. These are cases of horrific bad luck mixed with miraculous good luck. When researchers present scenarios like these to people and ask them to rate the overall luckiness, optimists consistently rate them as much luckier than pessimists do.
Is that just because optimists ignore the awful parts?
Not quite ignore, but they seem to psychologically minimize the weight of the negative components in their overall judgment. They focus more on the astonishing fact of survival against the odds. Pessimists, on the other hand, tend to magnify the horror, the trauma, the sheer unlikelihood of being in that situation in the first place. That focus diminishes their perception of the good fortune in surviving it. It's like a filter. One person walks away feeling like a survivor, the other feels like a target. Same event, vastly different internal narratives.
And this power of framing, it's not just about feelings. It demonstrably affects decisions, even among experts. The work by Kahneman and Tversky on medical decisions is a stark example.
Oh, absolutely. Their research on framing effects, which was part of the foundation for prospect theory, is classic. They presented physicians with identical statistics about lung cancer treatments, but framed differently. In one version, the outcome was framed positively. The 1-month survival rate for this surgery is 90%. When framed that way, a huge majority of doctors, something like 84%, chose the surgery.
But then they presented the exact same data framed negatively.
Right. There is a 10% mortality rate in the first month. Objectively, it's the same information. 90% survival equals 10% mortality. But just flipping the frame to focus on the loss, the mortality, caused the preference for surgery to plummet. Only about 50% chose it then.
Wow. Same data. Drastically different choices from trained professionals.
It shows how deeply wired we are to avoid perceived losses and seek out perceived gains. Even when the underlying reality is identical, people cultivating a lucky mindset, whether consciously or not, are essentially doing this for themselves. They're actively looking for and emphasizing the survival rate frame in their own lives, even when the mortality rate is equally true.
Okay, we've gone from making luck to feeling lucky. Now let's zoom out and look at luck from a more systemic view. This gets into the normative theory of luck. The core idea here is that in many complex systems, maybe most, success can be a really poor indicator of actual skill or merit.
Exactly. This is where thinkers like Nassim Taleb come in, warning us about being fooled by randomness. We have this incredibly strong cognitive bias, hindsight bias. After something happens, especially a big success or failure, we look back and our brains automatically construct a neat causal story. It seems inevitable in retrospect. We systematically underestimate the role of chance.
Which leads to what Taleb calls the lucky fool, the person who benefits from a string of good fortune, but confidently attributes it all to their own genius or strategy.
It might even be adaptive to some extent, you know. Believing your success is due to skill boosts confidence, encourages future risk-taking. Maybe we're slightly wired to fool ourselves this way, but intellectually acknowledging the massive role of randomness requires real discipline. It means admitting that maybe the external world, the luck factor, played a bigger part than our own agency in a particular outcome.
Let's look at academia. You'd think that's a field where merit reigns supreme, but the sources point out something different based on what senior academics say about career paths.
Yeah, it's quite revealing. Like, experienced professors often say that things like hard work, intelligence, being a good scientist, they're absolutely necessary, but they are insufficient for major success.
Necessary but insufficient. That phrase really sticks. Why insufficient?
Because academic careers are often shaped by factors entirely outside the researcher's control. Funding landscapes change, specific research areas fall in or out of fashion, key collaborations depend on others, global events can shift priorities. You can be brilliant and dedicated, but if the funding dries up for your specific niche, or a pandemic hits, or your university changes strategic direction, your path can be completely blocked through no fault of your own. It's often described as incremental, uncertain, even haphazard.
So the randomness comes from these external, unpredictable shifts, while the agency is about being prepared if a favorable shift happens.
Precisely. There's that great quote, sometimes a train passes and you need to jump. Your agency is doing the hard work. Getting the PhD, developing the skills, having the research proposal ready. You have to be standing at the station, prepared. The train is the unpredictable opportunity. A sudden grant availability, a technological breakthrough that makes your work relevant, a chance encounter at a conference. The luck is the train arriving. Your agency is being ready to jump on it. Without the preparation, the luck is useless. But often, without the luck, the preparation doesn't lead to that big breakthrough.
But if we emphasize chance so much, doesn't that risk encouraging a kind of fatalism? Like, well, it's all random anyway, why bother trying?
That's a really common concern, but the sources argue strongly against that interpretation. Using chance models, especially in fields like management or economics, isn't about promoting defeatism, it's about developing more robust understanding. By acknowledging randomness, we overcome the dangerous illusion of complete control. Believing past success was 100% skill makes you brittle, unprepared for inevitable downturns or unexpected events. Running simulations, considering counterfactuals, what could have happened, helps us learn systemic lessons, not just idolize the one lucky success story. It actually leads to better preparation, better risk management, not surrender.
And psychologically, we seem hardwired to distrust randomness, don't we? There's this cognitive asymmetry of chance. We fear bad luck more than we value good luck.
Yeah, the evidence for this is pretty compelling. There was an experiment where people had to choose between taking a long exam, say 100 questions, versus a short one, maybe 10 questions, in a scenario where performing poorly on the exam would mean losing a good grade they already expected. People overwhelmingly chose the long exam
Why the long one?
because of the law of large numbers. A longer exam gives a score that's much more likely to reflect your true knowledge level. It minimizes the chance of getting an atypically bad result just due to unlucky question selection. They were rationally minimizing downside risk.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happened when the situation was flipped? When they stood to gain something extra from a good score?
That's where the asymmetry shows up. In the gain scenario, the short exam actually maximizes your chance of getting an atypically good result. Maybe you just happen to know the answer to those 10 questions really well, better than your overall knowledge. It maximizes the potential for a lucky positive outcome. But even then, participants still tended to prefer the safer, longer exam.
So even when offered a chance for a lucky break with no real downside, they shied away from it.
It seems so. It suggests we're more motivated to avoid the negative feeling of being unlucky, losing the grade, than we are to pursue the positive feeling of being lucky, getting an unexpected bonus. We instinctively view chance as more of an enemy than a potential friend, prioritizing control and predictability over potential random upside.
It's fascinating how deep that runs. But randomness isn't always the enemy, is it? In some fields, like mathematics, it's actually used as a problem-solving tool.
Yes, that's a really cool, counterintuitive point. Sometimes when a system is incredibly complex, trying to map out every single deterministic rule or path becomes impossible, computationally overwhelming. So mathematicians actually introduce randomness to find a solution. Percolation theory is a great example.
Percolation theory.
Yeah.
Can you give us the nutshell version? How does randomness help there?
Sure. Think about how something like water seeps through porous rock, or maybe how a forest fire spreads, or even how information travels through a social network. These are complex systems with lots of random connections or blockages. Trying to calculate every single possible path deterministically is often just too hard. But if you model the process using random steps, like a random walk, you can figure out the overall properties of the system much more easily. Things like, what's the probability that the water makes it all the way through, or that the information reaches a certain part of the network? Randomness simplifies the analysis by focusing on probabilities rather than exact paths. It kind of loosens things up, making intractable problems solvable. It shows randomness can be a powerful analytical tool, not just noise.
Okay, we've covered agency, psychology, systemic randomness. Now we hit the really deep end, the ethical dimension. Moral luck. This concept tackles the profoundly uncomfortable question. If luck, something totally outside our control, can influence not just what happens to us, but what we actually do, then what does that mean for moral responsibility?
This is where philosopher Bernard Williams made a huge impact. He argued against the traditional view, often associated with Kant, that morality should only concern itself with what's fully in our control, basically, our intentions, our will. Williams said, no, luck permeates everything, including our actions and their consequences, and those consequences matter morally, even if they were unintended or influenced by chance. Our moral lives are entangled with luck.
And he used a very stark example to illustrate this, didn't he? The lorry driver.
Yes, the lorry driver example is central to his argument. Imagine a truck driver who, through absolutely no fault of his own, he's driving carefully, obeying all rules, his truck is well maintained, a child suddenly darts out into the road, and he hits and kills the child. It's a horrific accident, purely down to bad luck, terrible timing. His conduct was flawless.
Yet Williams argues the driver feels something profound, something devastating, even though he's not technically blameworthy.
Exactly. Williams identifies this specific feeling as agent regret. And it's crucial to distinguish this from remorse. Remorse is what you feel when you've done something wrong voluntarily. The driver hasn't done that. Agent regret is the deep, miserable feeling that arises simply from the fact that I did this. My action, however unintentional, caused this terrible outcome.
So the regret isn't about his intentions or choices, but about his causal role in the event.
Precisely. His history as an agent in the world now includes killing a child. That becomes part of his story, part of his identity, regardless of his lack of fault. If the driver only felt relief that his conscience was clear because he got a thing wrong, which might be the purely Kantian take focusing only on the will, Williams suggests we'd likely see him as disturbingly detached, maybe even callous. The agent regret acknowledges the tragic link between his agency and the terrible outcome, even though that link was forged by luck. It recognizes that our actions have real-world impacts that go beyond our intentions.
So the Kantian approach, by trying to insulate morality purely within the controllable realm of intention, offers a kind of philosophical protection against the messiness of luck. But Williams saw that as making agency too thin, too disconnected.
Yes. He described that purely intention-focused view as potentially rendering agency superficial. If my moral worth is only tied to my good intentions, and I disregard the actual outcomes of my actions in the world because those outcomes are subject to luck, then my agency isn't really engaging with reality. It's like I'm sealed off in my own head. True agency, impactful agency, has to operate in the world, and the world is messy and unpredictable.
It's like the difference between meaning to hit a target and actually hitting it. My intention is pure, but a sudden gust of wind, pure luck, might make me miss. If I only value the intention, I'm ignoring whether my actions actually achieve anything.
Exactly. To act meaningfully, to try and have an impact, means you have to accept the possibility that luck will intervene, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, sometimes leading to tragic, unintended consequences. Williams used this beautiful metaphor. One's history as an agent is a web in which anything that is the product of the will is surrounded and held up and partly formed by things that are not. Our choices, the will, are embedded in this larger web of circumstance, chance, and the actions of others, things that are not the will. To be an effective agent, you have to embrace that entanglement, including the vulnerability to moral luck. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed from practical formulas for luck through psychology and systems right into some deep ethical waters. Bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway for someone listening, trying to make sense of their own life, their successes, their failures?
I think the core message is the surprising power of embracing randomness, rather than denying it or fighting it futilely. Doing so yields, I think, two major benefits. First, on a personal and even societal level, acknowledging luck fosters humility and empathy. If you recognize that your own success wasn't just skill, but also involved fortunate timing, lucky breaks, maybe supportive circumstances, you didn't create that train passing by, you're likely to be more humble about your achievements and more empathetic towards those who haven't had the same breaks. This understanding can translate into greater support for things like social safety nets, because you see failure not just as a personal failing, but often as a consequence of circumstance, of bad luck.
Humility and empathy, that's huge. And the second benefit relates more to practical decision-making.
Yes. Acknowledging luck makes you a much smarter decision maker, especially when dealing with uncertainty. This is where the idea of luck selection comes in. When you start something new and inherently risky, a business venture, a speculative investment, maybe even a new relationship or career path, you simply cannot know how the luck will play out initially. So, you need to be what the sources call light footed. Go in with awareness, but be ready to reassess constantly based on how things unfold. If the external factors, the luck, consistently turn against you, maybe a sudden market crash, a competitor's unexpected move, a regulatory change, don't fall into the sunk cost fallacy or the lucky fool trap of blaming yourself entirely and stubbornly pushing harder. Instead, acknowledge the role of bad luck, dispassionately assess the changed odds, and be willing to cut your losses strategically and pivot. Recognizing luck allows for faster, more rational adaptation.
That makes a lot of sense. Be ready to jump on the train, but also be ready to jump off if it's clearly heading towards a cliff you didn't foresee. So we
Yes.
started with engineering luck, but there's also this idea of different types of serendipity, right? Which maybe points towards a deeper kind of mastery.
Absolutely. The sources mention three types, which is a nice way to think about it. First, there's Archimedean serendipity. That's when you're looking for solution A, and you find solution A, but in a completely unexpected way. Think of Fleming finding penicillin because mold contaminated his bacteria experiment. He was looking for antibacterial agents and found one via an accident. Preparation met chance.
Okay. Finding what you sought, but surprisingly. What's the second type?
Columbian serendipity,
Hmm.
named after Columbus, obviously. You set out looking for A, but you accidentally stumble upon B, which turns out to be valuable. The classic example is the researchers looking for a heart medication who accidentally discovered the effects of Viagra. A total pivot prompted by an unexpected finding.
Right. Finding something valuable you weren't even looking for. And the third type. This one seems the most profound.
Galilean serendipity. This is finding something totally unsought, maybe even unrelated to your initial quest, but having the sagacity, the wisdom, and insight to recognize its profound significance. Galileo was observing Jupiter, probably just documenting its position, and he noticed these faint stars nearby that moved with it. He wasn't looking for moons, but his prepared mind and keen observation allowed him to realize what they were, revolutionizing astronomy. It requires not just luck, but deep insight to capitalize on that kind of accidental discovery.
So we start by trying to increase our luck surface area through doing and telling. That's Archimedean, maybe Columbian at best. But the ultimate skill, perhaps, isn't just making luck, but developing the wisdom, the sagacity to recognize and harness the truly unexpected, the Galilean discoveries that luck throws our way when we're looking for something else entirely. That requires staying incredibly observant and open, even when, maybe especially when, the world feels chaotic and random. That's quite a challenge to leave our listeners with.